If you want to build a billion-dollar movie franchise, you need a perfect first chapter. A film that unites everyone, creates a beloved hero, and makes the next 10 movies inevitable. But in 2013, Warner Brothers made a Superman film that did the exact opposite. It made a $670 million profit, and yet it poisoned its entire cinematic universe from the very start. This is the story of Man of Steel, how a box office success became a catastrophic strategic failure. Subscribe to Cinema Economics to understand the real rules, the leverage and lost futures that decide who wins in Hollywood. Now, let's look at the numbers, because the first red flag was hidden in the profits. The numbers. A profitable yet problematic launch. Let's look at the ledger. On the surface, the math works. Man of Steel was a major investment. Its production budget was reported at $225 million. A conservative estimate for a global marketing campaign for a film of this scale would be at least $150 million. That puts the total investment at roughly $375 million. The film's worldwide box office gross was $670 million. Following the standard industry model, a film needs to earn approximately 2 to 2.5 times its production budget to break even, accounting for marketing and the theater share of the revenue. By that formula, Man of Steel's break-even point was likely between $500 to $600 million. It cleared that. According to detailed profitability analysis from Deadline Hollywood, the film generated an estimated net profit of around $42.7 million for Warner Brothers. The studio made money. This is an objective fact. But in the context of its strategic mission, this profit was alarmingly thin. Compare it to its true benchmark, Marvel's Iron Man 2008. That film had a lower budget, $140 million, and a slightly lower global gross, $585 million. Yet its profit margin was healthier. More importantly, its cultural return was enormous. It was a clean, beloved hit that launched the Marvel Cinematic Universe with explosive momentum and immense audience goodwill. It was an efficient, high-leverage investment. Man of Steel was the opposite. It was a high-cost, lower-margin product. The $670 million gross was just enough to validate the investment, but not enough to declare a new era. The modest profit revealed a critical vulnerability. The film was so expensive to make and market that it required near-perfect global performance just to be moderately successful. This financial model set a dangerous precedent for the entire DCEU. It established a baseline where every film needed to be a mega blockbuster just to be profitable. There was no room for mid-budget experimentation or a single underperformance. The entire universe was built on an economic tightrope from day one. The profit was a green light, but it was a warning light flashing amber. It proved Superman could make money, but it failed to prove he could effortlessly print it. This lack of overwhelming, unambiguous financial dominance created hesitation. It made the next move a nervous one. The core divide, a $670 million question of tone. The box office math showed a path forward, but the audience reaction revealed a dangerous fault line. Warner Brothers made a monumental creative decision. They chose a specific, high-risk tone. They hired Zack Snyder, a visual stylist known for mythic grandeur. They brought in Christopher Nolan's realistic aesthetic as a producer. The goal was clear: to redefine Superman for a modern, post-Dark Knight audience, to make him real. This meant discarding the primary color optimism. It meant a Superman racked with existential doubt. It meant a first flight scene of exhilarating joy. But it also meant a final battle of catastrophic, city-leveling destruction where thousands presumably perished. It meant a climactic moment where Superman, to save a family, kills General Zod. The intent was dramatic weight. The result was a cultural split. Critics were divided, a 56% Rotten Tomatoes score. Audiences were split, a 75% audience score. Its A- cinema score was solid, but for a superhero origin story, a genre built on broad, feel-good appeal, it was telling. It was a grade of great, but with reservations. This division is the core of the failure. For a standalone film, debate can be good. It drives conversation. For a universe-launching cornerstone, division is a strategic poison. Your first film cannot be a question. It must be an answer. It must be a unifying, enthusiastic yes that builds a wide, stable platform for future stories. Man of Steel was not that. It asked a profound, difficult question. What would a real Superman be like? And it gave an answer that a significant portion of its audience rejected. They did not see their Superman in this brooding, destructive figure. They saw a betrayal of the character's core idealism. Economically, this created a fan base with a built-in ceiling. You had ardent defenders and passionate detractors. The middle ground of casual, universal affection, the kind that drives repeat viewings, sells limitless merchandise, and makes a character a permanent part of the culture, was fractured. The film succeeded in making Superman relevant, but it failed in making him beloved on his own new terms. It created value, but it was contested value. And in franchise building, contested foundational assets are a liability. They force every subsequent business and creative decision to navigate that initial split, rather than build upon unified goodwill. This was the crack in the foundation. The next film wouldn't just be a sequel, it would be a negotiation with this division. The strategic domino effect: how Man of Steel forced Batman vs. Superman. The division created by Man of Steel did not exist in a vacuum. It created a strategic crisis for Warner Brothers. It forced their next move. The math of the reaction dictated the next business decision. After a clean, universally acclaimed hit, the logical path is a direct sequel. You double down on what worked. You deepen the story. Iron Man led to Iron Man 2. It was a straightforward equation. Man of Steel made that equation unsolvable. A direct sequel, Man of Steel 2, was now a high-risk proposition. Would the divided audience return? Would the controversy limit its box office ceiling? The thin profit margin of the first film offered no safety net. The studio's confidence in Superman as a solo box office anchor was shaken. Faced with this, Warner Brothers made the pivotal defensive pivot. They accelerated their entire plan. To de-risk the Superman sequel, they would graft it onto a sure thing: Batman. The world's most popular superhero would be used as a life raft for the world's most famous one. Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice was not born from pure creative vision. It was born from corporate risk management. It was a hedge. The film's very premise, "We need Batman to make people care about Superman again," is an admission that the Man of Steel foundation was unstable. This is the catastrophic domino effect. The creative DNA of Man of Steel, its gritty tone, its morally conflicted hero, its destructive climax, was not course-corrected. It was institutionalized and amplified. It became the non-negotiable template for the entire DC universe. Batman was now inserted into that world, guaranteeing he would be darker and more brutal to match. The studio lost all strategic patience and leverage. The opportunity to slowly build a universe, to let Superman find his optimistic footing in a second film, was sacrificed. They traded long-term character equity for short-term box office insurance. They chose to merge their two greatest icons in a second act, before either character's solo journey had earned it. Man of Steel didn't just fail to launch a universe, it forced the universe into a premature, defensive, and fatally compromised shape. The next film wasn't a step forward, it was a frantic overcorrection. The collateral damage: poisoning the well. The consequences of Man of Steel's divisive launch extended far beyond forcing a rushed team-up. It actively poisoned the well for the entire DC Extended Universe, creating specific, lasting liabilities that every subsequent film had to manage or overcome. First, it severely damaged the core asset, Superman's character capital. The superhero genre's most powerful currency is a hero's moral authority. Man of Steel spent that capital in its final act. By having Superman kill Zod, a defensible narrative choice for a rookie hero, it created a hero burdened with guilt and ethical compromise from his first outing. This wasn't a flaw to be explored, it was a foundational trait. Every future appearance, in Batman vs. Superman, Justice League, had to grapple with this murderer label, forcing the character into perpetual angst instead of allowing him to evolve into a symbol of hope. It made the character harder to write and less inspiring to watch. Second, it established a destructive aesthetic as the DCEU brand. The film's third act, with its widespread 9/11 evoking destruction of Metropolis, set a visual and ethical template. It told audiences that this universe was one where superhero battles had catastrophic, realistic collateral damage. This created a narrative debt that Batman vs. Superman had to acknowledge, the Martha Loa plot, and it established a tone of consequence-free spectacle that later films couldn't escape. The universe was branded as grim, joyless, and destructive from its very first frame. Finally, and most critically, it compromised the DCEU's narrative and commercial logic. A shared universe thrives on audience investment in individual characters, which then fuels excitement for their team-ups. Man of Steel failed to create a Superman that a broad, enthusiastic majority was eager to see again by himself. This broke the foundational commercial logic of a universe. It meant the first solo sequel had to include Batman to sell tickets. It meant the team-up movie, Justice League, was built on the shaky foundations of two divisive Superman films and a Batman introduced in a state of cynical fatigue. In essence, Man of Steel did not just lay a weak foundation, it laid a toxic one. It built narrative problems and brand perceptions into the bedrock of the DCEU. Every subsequent film was an expensive, often contradictory attempt to build a glittering skyscraper on that contaminated ground. The cracks were not superficial, they were in the soil itself. Final verdict: the cost of a divided beginning. Let's state the final verdict clearly. On the narrowest of terms, Man of Steel succeeded. It was a profitable reboot of a stalled franchise. It grossed $670 million against a $225 million budget. Warner Brothers netted a return. By that single metric, it was not a failure. But in the high-stakes game of franchise economics, a game defined by long-term leverage and cultural capital, it was a profound strategic failure. It achieved the minimum viable product while failing its ultimate mission. Its mission was not merely to be profitable. Its mission was to be the flawless, unifying cornerstone for a multi-billion-dollar cinematic universe. It needed to accomplish what Iron Man did: create an adored, unambiguous asset that generated explosive demand for more. It did the opposite. It created a divided, contested asset. It asked a difficult, polarizing question about Superman and gave an answer that split its audience. It turned the world's most iconic symbol of hope into a figure of debate and moral compromise. This division had a direct, quantifiable cost. It forced Warner Brothers to abandon a simple, confident path. It eliminated Man of Steel 2 as a viable option. It triggered the panicked, defensive pivot to Batman vs. Superman, a film conceived not from creative vision, but from corporate risk management. The thin profit of the first film was spent 100 times over on the costly course corrections, rushed productions, and brand rehabilitation that followed. The true failure of Man of Steel is not in its ledger. It is in the road not taken. It is in the universe that never was. It is in the decades of Superman stories that were foreclosed, the unified audience that was never built, and the leverage that was surrendered before the war even began. We dismantle box office myths to show you the real power dynamics, Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. And this story isn't over. The case of Man of Steel is just one part of a bigger pattern. Watch the full playlist here. The next video in the series breaks down the sequel to this very failure, Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. It's the definitive case study on how to win a box office battle and lose a franchise war.